It's part of human nature to want to be free. And in spite of this, the concept of employment evolved out of a system that never offered freedom to the majority. What began as slavery and then evolved into serfdom under feudalism eventually took the form of wage labor. But those systems are basically the same in that the majority of people spend most of their lives working to survive, mostly for the benefit of the small minority who own the land, the factory, the company, or the platform. And we've been brainwashed to see this as normal, desirable even, desirable. And we congratulate people for getting a job, and we see losing a job as a failure or a tragedy. But it hasn't always been this way. And as early as 1st century BC, employment was compared to slavery. This is what Cicero said. So ancient Greeks and Romans believed that free men must not work, that work was for slaves only, and that the pursuits of free citizens were philosophy, art, gymnastics, and conversation. I don't know about gymnastics, but the rest is very pursuable: philosophy, art, conversation. So idleness wasn't seen as bad in ancient times. It was seen as the foundation of civilization. I've always had a problem with the idea of full-time employment of 8 hours a day and having a supervisor and 5 week vacation a year, staying for years in one role, performing tasks that might have been interesting for a while at the beginning. Yeah. I've always been more of a free roaming chicken. And instead of a normal work life, I've been doing working adventures, like different kind of jobs in different countries or cities for a couple of months. Maximum was 10 months, and with longer breaks in between jobs. And this lifestyle requires frugality and not participating in consumerist culture. I shop at flea markets, and for food, mostly at small fruit and vegetable shops. And now I'm preparing to move into a van. And this life suits me better. It makes me feel more free. But I know it's not real freedom, and definitely not a global solution to the problem of employment of humans as modern slaves working for the capitalists. When someone criticizes capitalism, they get called a communist or socialist, like those are bad words. And why? Because communism questions profit and private ownership, and that scares the people who make the most money from the system, like billionaires, landlords, and big business owners. If the means of production were owned by the people or shared fairly, then the rich wouldn't have all the power, and they can't let that happen. So in the countries like the US, the media, schools, even Hollywood movies, they teach people that anything similar to socialism and communism is dangerous and evil because they threaten the system that keeps a few people rich and everyone else overworked just to survive. So should we be afraid of communism? We shouldn't be afraid of communism as an idea, but we should be afraid of authoritarian regimes that call themselves communist because most of them were oppressive and violent. But at the same time, we should also be afraid of capitalist system that strip away human dignity and concentrate wealth in a tiny elite and destroy the environment. When people say communism, they think of the Soviet Union under Stalin, Mao's China, Vietnam, Cuba, North Korea. These are all authoritarian one-party states that use Marxist ideology to justify centralized power. So in those countries there were famines, purges, mass surveillance, state control, dictatorship, poverty, totalitarianism. All that has nothing to do with communism or socialism that Marx imagined. So the main disadvantage of a socialist system is that they get hijacked by authoritarian regimes and turned into something that has little to do with socialism while still calling it socialism. So are humans naturally prone to authoritarianism? In the times of war, big social changes or economic problems, people are more open to authoritarian leaders, and some scientists believe that this reaction is part of survival instinct. In dangerous situations, humans naturally look for someone to take control and protect the group. And authoritarianism can happen on both political left and right. It's not just communism. So we shouldn't be afraid of authoritarianism dressed up as an ideology, whether that's communism, nationalism, fascism, neoliberal capitalism. So what was communism originally meant to be? Karl Marx imagined communism as the final stage of human freedom, like a classless society with no private ownership of the means of production, like factories, land, banks, no exploitation of labor. People would work because they want to contribute, not just survive. The state would eventually wither away because it wouldn't be needed. In theory, communism meant maximum freedom, equality, human flourishing. But this Marx's vision was never realized in practice, so every real-world attempt turned into authoritarian rule. And what is socialism? According to Marx, socialism was meant to be the transition between capitalism and communism. So it's a system where the economy is run more collectively, either through state ownership or worker cooperatives, and where profits are used to benefit society, not just a few rich people. Socialism has many advantages: less inequality, more social stability, no exploitation of labor, elimination of poverty and class division, healthcare, education, housing for everyone, just because you're human, worker protection, shorter hours, state investment in public goods and in green energy. Production was focused on needs, not on profit. And it was similar to that in Yugoslavia, where I grew up, and many older people are nostalgic about Yugoslavia. It did work well for some decades, but there was no freedom to criticize the government. So when people fear communism, they don't realize that what Marx wanted was the opposite of tyranny and authoritarianism. He wanted a world where no one ruled over anyone, where your value wasn't determined by your productivity. Last week I talked to a couple of Cubans, and they said in the last few years the situation in Cuba has gotten much worse than when Fidel was alive, and people are literally dying of hunger on the streets, and doctors make 12 euros a month. So it's really a human rights crisis, and the Cuban dictator and his flying monkeys used the name socialist for their system that could not be further away from socialism. It's the rule of the few over the majority of people who are suffering. And in that, it's much more similar to capitalism. In capitalism, there's a small minority that has too much, while the big majority are employed by them in the conditions that never enable them to be free, not before they're old and useless to the capitalists. But he was also skeptical. He thought that if the capitalists resist democracy, that revolution might still be needed. And capitalists do resist democracy because capitalism isn't compatible with democracy. This is what Noam Chomsky had to say about it.
For about 40 years now, there have been regular polls asking people what do they think about tax policy. And large majorities are in favor of much higher taxes on the rich and on the corporate system. Policy goes the opposite direction. And the same is true on minimum wage, on national health, just about any topic you look at. There's a huge divergence. And that simply reflects the fact that capitalism, in anything like the form we have at least, is inconsistent with democracy.
So capitalism undermines democracy, and to have democracy, like real democracy, we need to limit capitalism instead of what we're doing now, which is severely limiting democracy so we can have capitalism. Because if capitalists can finance political campaigns and thus choose the government who will then make laws that make the rich richer and the poor poorer, that's not democracy, that's not what people want. When billionaires and corporations fund political campaigns and media, they drown out the voice of ordinary people. And we only have our votes. And in a system when money controls access to power, votes don't have value. Our votes can't compete with money. So in extreme capitalism like we have in the US, we will always have laws that benefit the rich and hurt the poor, where most people live in economic servitude to the rich capitalists. And they're brainwashed into thinking that it's how it should be and that we're free. When banks and big corporations are in trouble, the workers bail them out with taxes, not the capitalists. In the end, it's not about capitalism versus socialism. It's about the concentration of power and wealth in the hands of the few, which happens under any extreme system. And unregulated capitalism becomes extreme, just like authoritarianist socialism did. And both lead to concentration of power in a few hands. And neither delivers freedom and well-being for everyone that they promise. So which system is more likely to work in practice? A mixed system. So neither pure capitalism nor pure socialism has worked in practice. Unregulated capitalism, like in the US, does deliver innovation and growth, but also exploitation of the majority, inequality, collapse of democracy. It's bad for environment. It accelerates climate change. Authoritarian socialism did deliver security. People had their basic needs met. In Yugoslavia, it was more than basic needs, and there was zero unemployment. But people had to keep their mouth shut. There was repression, stagnation, corruption. Then we have social democracy, which has proven to work best in practice so far. Though not perfect, but there's a balance of market and welfare, innovation and equality. And why are we talking about social democracy, not socialism? What's the difference? So socialism and social democracy both advocate for more equality and worker rights. But socialism wants to replace capitalism, while social democracy wants to fix it. That's the goal of social democracy, to regulate capitalism with laws, taxes, social protections to prevent harm and exploitation of workers. In short, socialism or social democracy actually is capitalism with a conscience. So you can still own things and businesses, but not in a way that exploit people and destroy the environment. And this is what exists basically in countries like Sweden, Denmark, Norway, Spain, Germany. These are social democracies where public services and regulations make it safer, healthier, more equal for most people. Yeah, there are still rich and poor, but no one has to end up on the street or living in their car because they got sick. So in social democracies, capitalists are not keeping people in constant fear, anxiety, and stress. Everyone gets healthcare and education without going into debt. So yeah, it's not perfect, but so it's not perfect, but it's a more humane version of capitalism.
Brian, why do you think you should be paying more tax?
Because I feel I would like to live in a pleasant, comfortable society. And to do that, that means you have to reduce the number of poor people. I don't like the thought that half of the population are struggling. And I don't think there's any need that they should be struggling. There are plenty of people that are quite well off like me who would be happy to share their money a little bit more than they do.
And for you, if you were to be taxed on what you guys are asking for, which is 2% over 10 million, how would that impact your life? What are the things that you might not be able to do having been taxed at that rate?
I wouldn't even qualify for that tax, to be honest. I mean, I might just qualify, but you realise it's 2% on the money that you earn over 10 million. So you've got 10 million before you start paying it. And I think it's so modest. I mean, I've agitated within this movement to say, why don't we make it 5% or 10% or something like that?
What about those, what's your message to, because we hear a lot about those millionaires or billionaires, you know, people like Elon Musk who obviously don't think the same way you do and think that they should, you know, be allowed to accumulate their wealth into the billions and billions of pounds. What would your message be for those people?
It's obvious to me that there's a feedback loop involved in wealth, which to say if you get a little bit rich, you are very likely to get richer. It works the other way around with poverty. If you get poor, you're very likely to get poorer. So those things are not self-correcting. It doesn't work. There's not the trickle-down theory that people used to believe in the 70s and 80s, that it's good for people to get rich because that money gradually gets dispersed among poorer people, so it helps them. But that isn't what happens. The rich accumulate more and more wealth. It doesn't trickle down to anybody, it trickles up actually.
And Labour have obviously been very, very reluctant to speak about a wealth tax because they say that it might drive wealth creators or business people out of the country. Do you agree with that assessment?
I don't think that's true. I think some people will leave because there are some people who are mean-minded to the extent that they would rather go and live in some shithole country than pay an extra few £1,000 a year rent. So there are those people. Frankly, I'd be bloody pleased if they fucked off and went and lived there. Sorry about, excuse my language, but rich people really piss me off a little bit because it's so small-minded to think that the only thing that matters is the number that you have in the bank. It's just amazing to me. Don't we love life because we love seeing everybody else enjoying it as well?